Hello and welcome to the third of our podcast series titled Agribusiness in Focus, Expert Insights. This series is presented by different members of BDO's specialised food and agribusiness team and will provide a diverse range of topical financial, tax and business insights in short and easily digestible bursts. Today's session will be presented by myself, Andrew Jones, and Scott Rowan. I'm a partner with BDO's food and agribusiness team, specialising in corporate and international tax. Scott, if you could just introduce yourself.
Thanks, Andrew. My name's Scott Rowan. I'm an Associate Director in the consulting team at BDO, helping our clients with strategy and transformation, and that includes business continuity planning.
Fantastic, thanks. In this session, Scott is going to talk to us in relation to business continuity planning and its importance in relation to your agribusiness. Scott will talk to us about the need for continuity planning, recap COVID and some of the events that impacted from an agribusiness perspective, and then outline an approach to completing your continuity planning. Finally, we will leave you with a few next steps to get you started. So to get us started, Scott, could you please tell us a little about how business continuity fits into risk management and why it's important?
No problem, Andrew. Risk management is a process of trying to identify risks that might impact our businesses and the process of identifying mitigations to try to plan for and reduce the impacts when those events happen. So I guess each morning as I get into my car to drive to work, my risk management strategy is to put my seatbelt on, make sure that my young family does the same. The reason why I do that is to make sure that in the event of an accident, my family remains safe, protected, and hopefully life goes on. So I guess we can say the same from an agricultural perspective. And let's say the workers in an abattoir are required to wear cut-resistant gloves to protect employees. It's the process of foreseeing a risk, in this case, someone severely injuring themselves or losing their hand, and the process of putting in something in place to reduce that. So when we take that a step further, business continuity planning is a component of risk management, and it's focused on making sure that the risks that may interrupt the business from continuing as normal are appropriately planned for and mitigated. In my discussions with clients, I talk about business continuity being the activity that must continue while an event or its impacts are ongoing. So for example, what are we going to do when there's a cyclone or a severe weather event or a major impact to our operations like a fire to part of our processing facility? These events are called threats. And I think from a business continuity planning perspective, we've seen some of those threats we consider evolve and change over time. So I'll take you through a few of those threats that you might want to consider in relation to your operations. So you might want to consider supplier failure. So let's say you're a food processor and you rely heavily on access to road transport to get your product to market. Let's say that your main transport provider goes into administration and you're limited in the amount of trucks that could then take your product. Or an unplanned technology outage. As we see an increase in the use of ag tech in food and agribusiness, how can we continue to maintain production volumes when technology fails majorly? We've also seen in recent years major environmental events like flood and fire create significant impacts on the sector. How do we react as those events come nearer to our operations, but also what is the process after they have passed? Premises or utility failures. So what happens when you can't access your critical production buildings because of an issue? Say, let's say the loss of electricity. The next one, I guess historically hasn't been a prime focus for organisations in Australia, but here, 12 months on from the beginning of the impacts of COVID, the risk of pandemics need to be considered and managed. Historically, we've been worried about things like flu pandemics or, say, a gastro outbreak, and probably thought that these may only last for a few weeks. Laws and regulation can also change and change quickly. We've seen, again, in recent weeks, the actions of Facebook to limit the sharing of content from news publications. If a new law was to be introduced, how quickly could your organisation respond and pivot? Key person loss is probably more associated with smaller organisations, but the risk remains across many organisations. So what happens when Jimmy's hurt or injured and he was the only one that knew the password to the new finance system? Finally, and an increasing one, is how do we respond in the event of a security breach? So say confidential details about our customers are released publicly and the reputational damage that could come from that. And then I guess finally, I wanted to say that I think we've typically seen business continuity focused on infrastructure or IT. But I think as we've lived through COVID, we've seen some of the other considerations are equally important from a risk management perspective. For risk management to be successful and for your business continuity planning to be successful, it needs to be across your organisation and everyone needs to be involved in the process.
So thanks, Scott. You spoke about pandemics as a threat, and particularly the COVID impacts that we've lived through in the past 12 months. Can you recap that for us?
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. And I think I want to start off by acknowledging the past 12 months and what we've all been through. And I guess it's equally wanted to send a thanks to the food and agricultural sector for its resilience and continued strength. If I think back to this time last year, BDO was involved in a capacity building activity with the Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, and we conducted a 5-part webinar series to build business continuity planning awareness and capability across the sector. And I guess that was a really good project to be involved with and got to witness firsthand the collaboration between the state and federal governments, but also industry, to establish dedicated working groups to deal with the response and changing environment and requirements. And I guess if any of the viewers are keen to take a look at that series, it is available on the BDO website at www.bdo.com.au/DAF webinar series. And we'll put a link on screen at the end of this session as well. But if I think back to that time, we were dealing with things like supermarket supply shortages. We were struggling with the definition of what an essential worker was. We were complying with social distancing requirements. We had issues of labour supply of seasonal workers and, of course, the lack of toilet paper. These are all issues that I think most would say were new to us from a business context, and we probably hadn't planned for them previously. So I guess the value of having lived through a pandemic and an extended pandemic like COVID are that the learnings and the experience we can capture and then incorporate back into our businesses to improve any future response should we go through them again. I guess recapping some of the impacts to the agricultural sector from COVID. In 2020, as you can see on screen, we saw meat processing facilities in Victoria experience large clusters of COVID cases. Press at that time talked about factors such as employees working in close proximity to each other, but also factors such as large numbers of staff finishing work at the same time. As time went on, we saw government and industry help organisations with their business continuity planning and recommendations around approaches to reduce COVID risk. We also saw issues with seasonal workforce supply and limits on agribusinesses' ability to source foreign or interstate workers due to border lockdowns. And that impacted them in terms of their harvesting or processing and caused impacts to the amount that they were able to harvest and resulted in, I guess, increased wastage as a result. So hopefully those two quick highlights outline the reason for business continuity planning and why it's an important consideration for your organisation. It doesn't stop the event from happening. But through some advanced preparation, hopefully you can respond quicker and in a coordinated manner to lessen the impacts on your business. I guess then taking a turn away from COVID and thinking of other continuity impacts on the agricultural sector, the threat of cyber events continue to rise. So if you remember back to the events in February 2020 in relation to a core software supplier suffering a ransomware attack that stopped the ability for wall sales for a short period of time. Cyber is a real threat and one that I think we'll see much more of in the near future. So how would your business react in a similar event?
Thanks, Scott. That's really interesting. So I guess maybe a simple question. How do you go about developing a business continuity plan?
It sounds simple, but often it isn't for a variety of reasons, Andrew. And I guess time and capacity is normally the big limiting factor inside organizations. But I think it's also really easy to be complacent and think that we won't be impacted by those threats or that we'll be able to make it up as we go. But I'd like people to think of it as their competitive advantage. If you can respond quicker than your competitor can when you're both faced with the same threat, you'll benefit from the investment in planning. Here are my tips for creating and documenting continuity strategies. I guess first, start out by planning and preparing. Create a list of all the activities that your business does. So from a horticulture perspective, think about the entire life cycle of your crops and down to the detail. So for example, fertilizing is an important part of that process. Then consider the impact if you can't do that process for a certain period of time, let's say 2 weeks. So say your access to fertilizer is stopped. That impact could be critical on your crop success. Compare that to harvesting and say there's a threat of a failure of an important piece of equipment. You might have already taken steps to have multiples of the same machinery. And so the impact to your harvesting process is being impacted is low because you can operate the other machinery for longer periods of time in order to maintain your production levels. The outcome of this is that you'll have a list of your business processes that you consider critical. Then consider the available continuity strategies. So if my core machinery is unavailable, I might put in processes to be able to repair it with staff on site, or temporarily borrow machinery from a neighbouring farm, or even shift my processing to another site. Then document those strategies in a physical form. Benefit of that being that they are captured and then they can be used to test, train and maintain. And that's an important component of continuity planning. There's no point having the most well thought out continuity strategies if they're sitting in the back of someone's car or office and no one's aware of them. You need to make the time to make sure that they're communicated to staff that will be involved in executing them for you. You also need to train staff on the agreed continuity methods. So we're all used to regular drills such as fire drills and evacuation drills. This is an example of a strategy that we rehearse regularly, so when we're faced with a fire, we're prepared and know what to do. Then finally, we need to maintain our plans. We can't just do it once and forget. Cyber attacks were not a consideration years ago, and I think we can say the same about COVID and pandemics. So take the time on a regular basis to reconsider your continuity strategies. Then finally, if we do a walkthrough on how various planning might assist us, we'll have a period of normal operations that are then impacted by an event, as you can see on screen in the yellow. And then you follow a process to activate your continuity strategies and other risk management strategies. You might have done a range of planning inside your organization. So this slide shows how multiple plans might be enacted at the same perspective. So from an emergency perspective, how are we going to keep our employees safe? That's typically the first thing you'll do after an event. To crisis management, and how are you going to be able to respond quickly to events that could impact your reputation? To business continuity, and how you keep your critical processes continuing during or after that event, and through to disaster recovery planning and how we recover components of our business. So for example, IT systems or buildings. I'd also like to make the point that it's important to make sure that you keep detailed event logs during the process. It's too easy to forget when an event happened. If we go back to that Meatworks example and during COVID, when precisely did you receive the call that notified you of a worker having COVID, and how did you respond subsequently? I think we can all sort of see situations where that sort of information is going to be required from us. So keeping logs is essential, and your continuity planning needs to easily facilitate this. Then finally, the lessons learned process is also a critical component. Take the time to come together and discuss what worked well and what didn't work well, and how you might change your strategies as a result. Then these all feed back into that monitoring and review of plans, and the cycle continues as we talked before.
Okay, so what should be the next steps for anyone listening to our recording today?
Three things I'd love to see, Andrew. The first is start a discussion within your organisation. For business continuity to be effective, it has to be organisation-wide, and everyone needs to understand that why, and they need to be actively involved. The second one would be to start. It won't be perfect the first time you write your continuity planning, but it won't be complete, and it also doesn't have to be. It's a document and a process that needs to continue on, and you get the opportunity to continue to refine your strategies. And then thirdly, if you need assistance, reach out. At BDO, we're experienced in helping agribusinesses from many angles, including business continuity planning, and I'd be happy to have a discussion with you about your business. As we said at the beginning of the session, we've also shown on screen the URL for the DAF and BDO Business Continuity Strategy webinar series. And as promised, we've put a QR code on screen if you want to pause the session and quickly scan that to access those resources.
Great work, Scott. That was excellent. And I really hope that those listening today have found the session on business continuity planning useful. I certainly have taken away a lot of interesting insights. We really appreciate your time, Scott. Thank you. Scott and I can be contacted using the details on screen. If there are any other topics or needs that you'd like to discuss with us or would like us to cover in future sessions, please contact us to let us know. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew.